بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، نحمده ونشكره ونستعينه ونتوب إليه من سيئات أعمالنا، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنام محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين وصحبه المنتجبين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصاب الحسين عليه الصلاة والسلام. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Sisters and brothers, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يقول الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن الحكيم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لقد أرسلنا رسلنا بالبينات وأنزلنا معهم الكتاب والميزان ليقوم الناس بالقسط. We have indeed sent our messengers with the clear proofs and send down with them the book and the balance, so that people may uphold justice. Last night, since it was the first night of our program, I began by throwing out ideas and thoughts and thinking about Ashura. And I pointed out that Ashura is a very complex historical event, that we will not be able to do justice to it unless we understand its background, the purpose, the goal for the revolution and uprising, and later on the consequences of this uprising. Tonight, I would like to begin with another issue which is somehow related to last night. If last night we were focusing on the goal of the uprising, tonight I want to focus on the foundation, or ultimately the ground for the uprising, why the uprising took place, irrespective of what was the purpose of the uprising. No, what was the ground for it? Here, I think it's necessary to divert the conversation a little bit and digress and throw in another issue, that it is to a degree an academic issue, but at least during the past 10 to 12 years, as a theme for academic discussion, starting from, say, the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, this idea was there. Why some people revolt and revolutions take place. It became an issue and debated quite extensively during 1979 Islamic Revolution, where in the West they paid huge amount of space in academic discourse about what made the Iranian to make revolution, to stand up against the Shah. And again, the issue came to the surface during what we call the Arab Spring, 210, where it started with Tunis, the fire engulfed Libya, Egypt, then went right across the Middle East, Algeria, Morocco, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, and everybody else literally got into this fray. So the debate surfaced again, why some people revolt, and whether it would be possible to to assume that sometimes revolutions take place without any foundation, any reasons whatsoever. There were at least a few conferences that I remember during those days when I was at the university. They were discussing it at the School of International Studies at the University of Denver, focusing within the Arab world, why the revolution and the uprising in Tunisia succeeded in toppling the regime, but it didn't create, as well as in Libya, but didn't change the system, say in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Jordan, and other places. There was a heated debate between scholars. So if we were to assume there is a consensus reached that there is no revolution without a foundation, without a ground. If you want to understand the revolution, you really need to understand the ground for the revolution that ultimately leads to the revolution. Because in essence, revolution is nothing but a kind of disapproval in a basic unit, in a disapproval of a system, and or a unique social structure that people are not happy with, and then they don't see any hope of the system correcting itself. So we can't wait, or we have been waiting long enough and nothing has happened, and we need to take the matter into our own hand and change it. That's the basis for revolution. Now you can go around from country to country and find different reasons and how this resistance, disapproval, and refusal to submit to the authority was subdued. In Tunis, the powers to be, they were able to change the system, window dressing. The essence remained the same, but Hizb al-Nahda came to power and Ikhwan Muslimin came to power. But the essence of the problem remained the same. From 2011 up to now, almost 11 years, over 11 years, nothing of the socio-economic factors that led to the revolution has been addressed. Despite 11 years or 10 years at least of power of Ikhwan Muslimin in Tunis. That's why President bin Said said that, look, enough is enough. We really need to change the constitution and see if we can change the system. Playing around with the notion of what we call procedural democracy and holding everybody and suffocating them is not going to work. In Libya, NATO intervened and Muammar Gaddafi no more. In Egypt, again, another window dressing. Ikhwan Muslimin came to power. After 1 year of tragedy, Sisi revolted, kicked them out, and then went back to the same old system that existed before. In Jordan, the huge amount of money that Saudi Arabia paid to quieten the revolution and the uprising, to the tune of, according to some statistics, $3 to $4 billion. People were paid, the tribal chiefs were paid, and the whole revolution subsided. The rest of the Kuwait did the same thing. The rest of the Gulf people did the same thing. Maghreb the same, Algeria the same. So this debate is still going on. Now, if we consider the uprising of Imam Hussein as a revolution, and since we have already accepted that no revolution can take place without a ground for it, then we really need to pay attention. To understand the ground for the revolution of Imam Hussein, we really need to go even further. And that is to introduce an idea. Every faith, every religion, every, call it ideology that comes in, every revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that comes down and commands somebody to be the prophet is in essence nothing but revolution. Why? Because if the prevailing system was not corrupt, if the prevailing system was working perfectly well, if the society was balanced, both materialistically and spiritually, then there was no need for revolution, for sending down a new order. You go back in history. During the time of Ibrahim, you see the same thing. Ibrahim comes to correct a corrupt order and revolt against it. Musa comes to criticize and change the pharaohs and the system that the pharaoh has imposed on the community, and criticizes Pharaoh. Do you think this is a right system, a fair system, that you have enslaved my people? Isa comes when the Jewish tradition that was supposed to be balanced between the physical reality and the spiritual reality becomes detached from the spiritual reality and focuses on the physical reality. This is why when Jesus ultimately reaches a point where he is able, even according to the Christian tradition, he is able to go into the temple. He chases the Kohans and the rabbis out. Says you have turned the temple into some kind of money laundering business. In Islam, right from the beginning, when the story of creation is outlined, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً, and the command to the angels, فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. سَوَّيْتُهُ, that's the material thing, the clay. Spirit is the spiritual dimension. No system ultimately will be considered from an Islamic point of view to be just if it does not address both sides, the spiritual as well as the physical. This is why, on the one hand, لا رهبانية في الإسلام, trying to row a canoe with one paddle. You go in a circle. لا رهبانية في الإسلام means throwing the material life and focusing only purely on the spiritual life. Islam rejects. That's one dimension of human entity. On the other hand, focusing on the material life and becoming abidud dunya, as Imam Hussein salawatullah salam alayhi said regarding the people that lived at that time, الناس عبيد الدنيا والدين لاعق على ألسنتهم. They pay lip service to the faith. So long as the faith does not intrude on the private space and ask them to do any sacrifice. We can play around with the faith as long as the faith does not intrude on our comfort zone. So this is rejected as well. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. The karama, izzah, dignity that Islam gives is when the life is balanced. So when Islam came to inject new life into a dead society. Materialistically might be thriving. Rich in Mecca were making huge amount of profit out of the fact that Mecca was in a traveling zone. People had to come, as well as they kept their idols on the Kaaba and they charged them rent and everything else. So the tribes had to come on a regular basis to Kaaba to worship these stones, woods and everything else, and pay dues to the rich, Bani Umayyah and others within the Jahiliyyah. So they were quite content with it. This is why when the Holy Prophet came, قُولُوا لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ تُفْلِحُوا, throw this stuff out, you are hitting them right where it hurts, the economic part. And what was the answer? They went to the Holy Prophet, they went to Abu Talib, say, tell your cousin, your nephew, if he wants riches, we will provide him with all the riches in the world. If he wants to marry beautiful women, we will provide him as many as he wants. Don't touch the existing order. So Islam comes, يا أيها الذين آمنوا استجيبوا لله وللرسول إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم. The essence of this message is to inject life into a dead society, morally incompetent, spiritually dead, as well as materialistically, even there is no justice in it. So this notion, and then Islam declares, the verse in the beginning in Surah Al-Hadid, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْمِيزَانَ لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. Establishment of justice becomes the goal that every faith, every revelation has been sent down, so that people become the instrument for establishing justice. Justice in its all totality. Economic justice, social justice, spiritual justice, material justice, and everything else. A society that connects itself to the divine on one side, and on the other side does everything materialistically. Let's not be fooled or mistaken that Islam doesn't want you to thrive materialistically. Far from it. Islam doesn't want a society that is poor and sitting down and doing nothing. Islam wants a society that fundamentally works according to the hadith. اعمل لدنياك كأنك تعيش أبدا. Struggle hard. واعمل لآخرتك كأنك تموت غدا. Don't attach to the material. Work to gain it and use it for the benefit of everybody else. Now, most of you are, if not all of you, are students and have been to academia. If you imagine the distribution of the wealth when Islam came, and within 23 years period, that narrow gap, the have, which was only 1% or 2% of the Jahiliyyah society, reduced to huge amount. And that's what the rich people did not want. Islam wants an equal and equitable distribution between everybody. The poor will have this is why there is a verse in the Holy Quran, وَفِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ. There is a portion of this wealth that God has given it to you, so that you become the conduit, the instrument for giving this portion to the poor and the needy. When the society becomes corrupt, then when the needy become the needies, their rights are not given, then we are going for revolution. They are going to ultimately stand up. So Islam starts. Unfortunately, no matter what the Holy Prophet did for creating a normal transition from him to Amir al-Mu'mineen in Ghadir Khum, Saqifa disrupted it and unsettled the whole plan. You want to understand how this happened? The Holy Prophet dies beginning of around year 11 after Hijrah. Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salamu alayhi is elected around 36 or so after Hijrah, beginning of 37. The first sermon that he delivers, what does he talk about? The fact that the society has turned 180 degrees from the value and the morals that the Holy Prophet worked so hard in establishing. ألا وإن بليتكم قد عادت كهيئتها يوم بعث الله رسوله. You have returned to Jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah, Ya Rasul, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, we pray. So what? If prayer and fasting and everything else becomes superficial and ritualistic, The spirit of the prayer is not there. The spirit of fasting is not there. The spirit of social responsibility is not there. Then it's a jahiliyyah, a new form of jahiliyyah. No wonder Sayyid Qutb, when he spent a few months studying northern Colorado, Greeley, in a school in 1940s, he went back to become a teacher. He went back and wrote a book about the new jahiliyyah, particularly in an American capitalist society. Amir al-Mu'mineen, 25, 26 years after the demise of the Holy Prophet, is pointing out to the fact that society has become structurally corrupt. And then what he proposes, I have to turn you upside down. حتى يعود أسفلكم أعلاكم وأعلاكم أسفلكم. Those who are corruptly have taken position, they have to go down. And those who have been marginalized but they deserve to be the leader, they have to come up. So Saqif sabotaged and wrecked the plan for that خير أمة أخرجت للناس that ultimately was supposed to be created. It didn't take place. As a consequence, because of that corruption, the ground for the uprising of Imam Hussein first, and as consequently all other uprisings after that came out, was created. Once الناس عبيد الدنيا ألا ترون أن الحق لا يعمل به وأن الباطل لا ينهى عنه. Society becomes indifferent to haqq and batil. It's prepared to live with paradox. Pay lip service. We are Ahlul Bayt, followers of Ahlul Bayt. Last night I pointed out, if we were to send somebody back in history, to go back to years 60 and 61, and to assess the social structure that existed at the time, if that person is neither Shia or Sunni, the first thing that comes across to them is the paradox of the contradiction that exists in society. Kufa claims allegiance to Ahl al-Bayt and yet sells the sword to Bani Umayyah. Don't talk about Sham, Mecca or anywhere else. Once we get to that stage where society is no longer careful about haqq and batil, it doesn't matter for them whether Muawiyah is in charge or Ali. Let me remind you, most of you have heard this story as well and read about it. Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salam alayhi is martyred on the 21st of Ramadan. Immediately after a gathering organized in Masjid al-Kufa, and bay'ah is given to Imam Hassan. 6 months later, because of indifference of the Shia and the fact that they sabotaged the plan of Imam Hussein, Imam Hassan salawatullah salam alayhi, Imam Hassan had to make a peace treaty with Muawiyah. Muawiyah comes to Kufa, goes on the same member that Ali used to go on, and makes a declaration. Gets the paper, the peace treaty in his hand, and tears the paper. And he said, I did not make a peace with Hassan ibn Ali because I wanted to force you to do your prayers and fasting. You're already doing it. I did it because I wanted to rule on you, and you become my subject, and you follow my instruction. Today is Wednesday. We are going to do Salat al-Jum'ah on Wednesday because tomorrow I have to go to Sham. And the entire Muslim population stands behind Muawiyah doing Salat al-Jum'ah on Wednesday. Nobody raised a voice. And we have seen this repeatedly. When a society becomes morally impotent to the point that it really doesn't matter for them whether Hussein is in charge or Yazid, whether Muawiyah is in charge or Ali, or anything else, that society is dead. And as Quran says, they've gone through alienation and maskh, disfigurement. فَقُلْنَا لَهُمْ كُونُوا قِرَدَةً خَاسِئِينَ. This is a verse regarding Bani Israel. When they disobey, they become sinful, they go through all the tricks that to violate the principle. We turn their inner soul out, where they're no longer a human being. We have the physique of a human being. Another verse in the Holy Quran, بَلْ هُمْ كَالْأَنْعَامِ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ. They are low, you are lower than beast. You have the physical reality of a human being. But if the soul is dead, if the heart is gone turned into stone, remembrance of Allah doesn't exist. Comfort zone what matters. And that started immediately after the demise of the Holy Prophet. When Ali and Fatima sallallahu alayhim went to people of Medina and reminded them that you only a few days ago, a week ago or so, you swore allegiance in Al-Ghadir to my leadership. Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya Ali ibn Abi Talib, we just want to live. We are tired. When you get to this stage and the disfigurement has taken place, the soul is dead, somebody has to stand up. So the ground for the revolution is the fact that Islam was dead. Morally, the society was corrupt. Material was everything. You go to some of these books of hadith and series and look at Sahaba, what kind of wealth they had. One day, I decided to go through a basic formula in accounting that say net present value. And you calculate, or those of you who are familiar with accounting, you calculate the number of years, you assume an amount for recession or inflation during these years, and you put a value of the wealth at that time, and you calculate what would be the value of net present value now. At least 5 Sahabas that were present during the appointment of Uthman, they would have been even more wealthy than anybody else around. Not into billions, into trillions of dollars. This is within a short period of time. The society is dead. When the society is dead, then somebody needs to stand up. So the ground for the revolution, that Imam has to resurrect Islam and resuscitate the spirit of Islam into the life of the society. But where the mistake takes place, in some scholars saying, well, it didn't happen, they are trying to judge it within an immediate time, realizing that sometimes revolution takes time to produce, medium to long term. And the evidence for it, that's the qabr of Hussein ibn Ali. Search for where is the burial site of Yazid and what's left with Bani Umayyah. That's the mausoleum of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and where is Muawiyah? You have to search in Damascus into some alleys, somebody that knows where it is, and find it. Dusty, completely gone. It takes time. Bani Umayyah lost its power after Karbala. So now we have at least basic understanding. The ground was an attempt. This is why Zainab Salamullah alayha, as well as Imam Zain al-Abidin, when they stand we're going to address this, stand in front of Yazid in Sham, they focus on the fact that, Ya Yazid, you cannot destroy Islam. فَوَاللَّهِ لَا تَمْحُوا ذِكْرَنَا. Every time somebody says Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, the name of Ahlul Bayt is going to be alive. That was the reason. Otherwise, Islam would have been completely gone by the next generation after. And the paralysis that existed in society that they really didn't want, and even today, as I pointed out last night, أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم means no matter what they do, they come to power, you have to submit. Otherwise, they will put you in writs in somewhere and they take all your money. So this is the reality that we have. When society becomes corrupt, soul dies, people become only searching for material life, we have turned ourselves, disfigured, alienated ourselves from the reality. We have the physique of a human being, but not the soul of it. And what matters for the honor and dignity is the soul, not this reality, this physical reality outside. This afternoon, I was sitting with Haj Abbas and discussing. Suddenly I remembered a poem by a famous poet, Iranian poet Saadi, that has a ghazal that starts that if you have dignity for yourself as a human being, it's not because of this physical reality, it's because of the soul. And no matter how nice the outer attire, if the soul is dead, there is no reality whatsoever. تن آدمی شریف است به جان آدمیت نه همین لباس زیباست نشان آدمیت. And there is something within that ghazal. He says you are mesmerized by the flight of bird. Detach yourself from the attachment to the material world and submit yourself to the command of Allah and watch how humans fly. What matters for us human beings is the spiritual connection, not the material life. Now, inshallah, we will continue with our discussion tomorrow night. Tomorrow I would like to focus, before I continue with the other themes, what is the Sunni school of theology's understanding of Ashura and the uprising of Karbala? This is something that we can, from their own sources, not from our sources, from their own sources, how they present and depict Ashura and their views about this, inshallah. May Allah bless you all and grant you all guidance to stay committed to the ideals and goals of Ashura and Imam Hussein and Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.